No, no buzz. A Just Bees book club. I'm returning today with another book that I read in a book club format, a non Just Bees book club format. Tommy Orange's There. A book that I read initially, probably in for the first time, I would guess early 2020. I think about 2018. A book that devastated me. I think the first book I ever wrote a blurb for the bookstore. Um, a book that I've held in extremely high esteem for the last 4 years, and a book that I have been thinking about a lot since reading Wandering Stars, obviously, and a book that it turns out a lot of people I know have not read, despite the fact that I told them that it's a quite good book. And so, over the course of about 5 weeks, we read the 4 parts of this book and chatted about them sort of weekly, which was fascinating because it being so many people's first experience with the book, I can't imagine reading this book over the course of 5 weeks. It feels like such a 2 day book to me, um, and that's being like slow with it. Uh, but it was a really interesting experience, and I know this is a book club just for bees, and that only bees are allowed here. So this is like not a useful thing to say, but book clubs are cool. It's a reminder for myself in the future. Let's pivot it that way. Let's pretend that's not what I'm saying. Um, it is cool to know people and talk about books with them. Um, yeah, it really is. It's just like not a replicable thing by way of watching people talk to themselves on the internet or talk to other people they know on the internet. It is simply not the same. But yeah, my sort of biggest, I mean, my most sort of like immediate takeaway ultimately from rereading There is the ending still fucking works really hard. Part four, Aftermath, is I was reading it in the park that I sometimes read at when I can't find myself time to read elsewhere, or like in in familiar spaces, which is often the case. I go to this little park, and I was out there reading in the park, and it's the same park I probably referenced in the Wandering Stars video, where I was like out there taking notes on the book for that video. But it's the same park. I was just sitting there reading it, and it was not raining that night, but it was the night before the book club sort of finale. And even with that sort of temporal distance from things, like both from the first time I read it, from reading Wandering Stars, and from reading this over the course of like 5 weeks. I think it was 5 weeks. I think we only skipped one. Um, I was welling up constantly during the aftermath portion of the book. Um, I haven't talked about this book here, but yeah, like I said, it extremely affected me when I read it. I've been talking about it since. Um, the way the book ends to me is this really beautiful moment where a bunch of extremely well drawn characters come into something that is way too thinkable in um, in America right now, and has been for maybe that's since Columbine, maybe. Um, yeah, I had a handful of notes, sort of just things to talk about, because like I don't, I because I already talked myself through this book in many ways, and I have other people's ideas in my head that I don't want to just like jump off and say like hi there, blah, blah, blah. You know who the actual You know who's a really compelling argument for who narrates the prologue and interlude is? Shout out to that other bee who's been here a couple times. Um, Not going to do any of that, but it's all running through my brain. Um, yeah, there was one thing that I took a quote on, that is, I think, one of the things that came out of that conversation was one of the other people in the book club talked about how Wandering Stars makes There look like a first novel, and I rereading There made me think that that is like very true, which is wild. But I had a note. I'm just gonna read it from my notebook. On page 160, these are both from part 3. On page 163, I think this is an Opal chapter. I didn't write this down. I didn't write whose chapter it was down. But on page 163, there is the quote: "She believes we all do precisely what we think we can get away with." I'm 90% sure that's an Opal chapter. And then page 178, maybe I'll figure this one out specifically. Yeah, 163 is definitely an Opal chapter. Yeah, 178 is a Octavio chapter. Yeah. You could do what you could get away with. That's where it was at. And I quoted those two things because I think there's something interesting there in that I think a lot of what's happening in there is extremely good character work, like I said, but also these characters not being as far away from each other as they necessarily could be. I don't think Orange is specifically calling back to Opal's statement about she believes that we all do what we think we can get away with, in Octavio saying functionally the same thing. I don't think that does not read to me in any way like it's an intentional callback to 15 pages ago, right? And the relationship between Opal and Octavio are just not. It's just not a thing that makes sense characterologically. What it does speak to me is that there's a deep understanding of what Orange wants to talk about throughout this book. And I think this thing sort of happens multiple times throughout it, where sort of deeply unrelated characters will sort of come to the same conclusions about the way that people work. And you could say, uncharitably, that this is simply the author speaking through characters without thinking about their individualities or their interiorities even. The way the phrasing is different, I think, speaks to the fact that they do have their own interiorities. I think it's just leaking through in the way that a first novel can and probably has to leak the author's words. I'm going to be talking about Bakhtin and the dialogic versus the monologic at some point soon, so not deeply, I'm just going to say that out loud, and I'll say it out loud again soon. Yeah, there other big things. I was a little disappointed that I didn't find Edwin's first chapter, the one I think that ends part 1, any less annoying this time around. Edwin, another POV character in this novel that sort of brings together about a dozen voices, individually point of viewed, that are all sort of converging on the same powwow for various reasons. Um, Edwin's first chapter is all about how he has finished his MFA and sort of like fallen into a rut and become an internet addict and has gained a lot of weight and doesn't know how to deal with that. And I just don't. I just. I think every character in this book works really well, except for him. I think he's. I think his character's poorly drawn. There's like so many like very specific things. There's so many very broad things, but like one specific thing is like he's like addicted to the internet. Basically, I don't know if that exact terminology is used, but like it is so deeply unconvincing to me. He like I feel like he talks about like Google and Reddit and Wikipedia, and like as a person who has in we talked about this in book club, I guess, but the thought or the consensus there was that this is probably taking place in 2014. It's published in 2018. It's sort of in that general area. Um, the fact that there's not like any deep cuts that I can recall, any like very specific forums or anything like the fact that he doesn't use Soulseek or something like that. Like Soulseek would be like not a deep cut even a little bit, but like it just does not strike me as a person writing from personal knowledge of the thing. It strikes me as a sort of cultural trope, uh, which just sticks out like a sore thumb in this book. That seems like so many clear people are in it. Um, the other one thing that I talked about in book club that I really wanted to sort of end this on is I think the biking scenes. It's 125 in the paperback. Oh, before I get there, there's a lot of fun little things in the sort of paratext of the novel. The thing I was obsessed with on this read was the way that the sort of nonfiction aspects of the book play within the book, because I think we dug into this a little bit, and it sounds like processually the prologue was sort of written as twice as long as it is. It included the interlude in the middle of the book, but structurally, the way the book was published is that there's a prologue that is sort of a history of genocide, basically. I mean, and I don't mean basically like in any way other than that it is true. But it's sort of structured by the Indian Head test pattern that was on televisions from like the 20s till the late 70s, and then somewhere through part two there's an interlude that is also in the sort of second or the first person plural we voice that is only ever before in the prologue, that continues this sort of what appears to be nonfiction. And I don't have any of these thoughts in my head anymore, but there are effects that happen from having an interlude in the middle that sort of like recapitulates the authorial we that happens before the opening frame of the story happens, that I think are extremely worth interrogating, and sort of pushing on or asking questions of. And yeah, the other like small paratextual things, like I was looking at the difference between the hardcover and the paperback. It was like the difference between the like, you know, back of the book blurb, is like extremely similar to the sort of inside the dust jacket blurb with like a lot of superlatives removed. The more interesting thing that I'm not entirely sure why it happened, I'm sure there is just an explanation, is the the blurbs on the hardcover, the back of the dust jacket, were all from, let's see, I can actually reference this very specifically. They were from Louise Erdrich, they're from Marlon James, they're from Omar Al-Akkad, from Claire Vay Watkins, author of Gold Fame Citrus, and Pam Houston, author of Cowboys Are My Weakness. I know that because they are on like the 5th page of blurbs here in the paperback. The previous, what's 1, 2, 3? It's the 4th page. The previous 3 pages are things like this blurb. The first one here. Mr. Orange's sparkling debut is not merely a literary triumph, but a cultural and political one too. It is a work of defiance and recovery. Attributed to The Economist. We have blurbs attributed to the Christian Science Monitor, Mother Jones, The Guardian, Bustle, the Seattle Times, Goop, BuzzFeed, Pop Sugar, The Rumpus, Thrillist, Constance Grady at Vox, the Dallas Morning News, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, the Austin Chronicle, Santa Fe, New Mexican, Lakota County Times, the Times Literary Supplement London, the Financial Times, and then the author blurbs. There's a lot to think about in terms of marketing books that I'm in a particular position around. I know if I was looking at a book and I was like, this book looks cool, but I don't really know anything about it. If I saw a Louise Erdrich blurb on it, I would probably be more inclined to look further into it if I was, buying a used book, for instance, than if The Economist was the first thing that blurbed it. This is a cultural issue also, and there's many other things, but like I just don't know. I just don't know the marketing apparatus and the numbers that they have that indicate that like the paperback will sell better with, a blurb on the front that says an astonishing literary debut, exclamation point, in quotation marks, hyphen or M dash, Margaret Atwood, all in caps, lowercase, via Twitter. There's just like very specific things going on with this that are very weird. And then the other thing that I noticed, which I think is a production question. Okay, well, the other thing I noticed that is a production question is in the hardcover version, there is not a cast of characters. In the paperback, there is. That I have to assume is a question of feedback. Then there was also the people in the book club with newer editions of the book that didn't have the blurbs that were the ones that were initially on the back of the hardcover, the Louise Erdrich, the Marlon James, etc., etc. But it did have a thing on the very back page that was a sort of like, hey, Wandering Stars is coming soon, which I have to imagine, I don't know if I've actually brought this up in the the physical book club I went to, but I have to imagine is probably a concession for something along the lines of pages printed, like you cut the one to add the other sort of thing. And then we also had a discussion on the first meeting about the preface that I think is in the the library audiobook edition that includes a foreword about how you're about to fly if you bought this book. So I think there was a very specific edition of this book published with a foreword that was like specifically printed for airports. So I assumed it was like for Walden Books or Books a Million or something like that. Um, yeah, a lot of ephemera is cool. So yeah, 125. I'm gonna read a little scene about biking. Um, I'm not gonna read the scene. I'm just gonna wait. Yeah. Orville and his brothers leave the Indian Center and go straight to Target in West Oakland to get Lonnie's bike. Target in West Oakland. That's what I'm saying. That shit ain't Emeryville. Fuck Emeryville. West Oakland Target. Thanks for not watching.